The morning sun washed over the sprawling tarmac of Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport, glinting off the silver fuselage of Flight 237. To most of the passengers boarding, it was just another flight, a routine trip to Denver. Businessmen scrolled through emails on their phones. A mother soothed her restless toddler with promises of juice and cartoons, and a group of college students laughed about their weekend adventures before slinging backpacks into the overhead bins. Nothing seemed extraordinary about this flight, and that was exactly how everyone liked it. At the front of the plane, Captain Ward watched the boarding process with quiet attentiveness. She had long ago learned that the tone of a flight was set before the wheels even left the ground. A calm captain meant calm passengers, even if they never saw her face. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair tied neatly back, and her voice steady as she greeted her co-pilot and cabin crew. Had been in aviation for over 20 years, but flying never felt ordinary to her. Every time she stepped into a cockpit, she felt the same subtle thrill she had known since her first solo flight as a young naval aviator. The hum of instruments, the steady rhythm of checklists, the thrill of takeoff. It was a ritual she never tired of. Yet her passengers didn't know, and would likely never know, that before she flew commercial jets, she had been one of the Navy's most respected fighter pilots. Back then she was Captain Ward, she was Valkyrie. Her co-pilot, a younger officer named Jason Miller, settled into the right-hand seat. Fresh-faced and eager, he admired the way rookies admired veterans. "Weather looks good today, Captain," he said as he glanced at the charts. "Clear skies all the way to Denver," replied with a small smile. She sipped her coffee, scanning the instruments with practiced ease. "Let's make it a smooth ride." Jason chuckled nervously. "Always do, ma'am." Despite her composed exterior instincts, those finely tuned reflexes honed in combat missions never fully rested. She had seen too much in her Navy days to ever take clear skies for granted. Flying, she knew, was a delicate balance of machinery, weather, and human judgment. Even when everything seemed perfect, a single failure could tilt that balance toward catastrophe. Still, she kept those thoughts buried. Today wasn't about combat. It was about delivering 200 souls safely to their destination. The engines roared to life, a familiar vibration rumbling through the cockpit as the plane taxied toward the runway. Hands rested lightly on the controls, steady, confident. The tower cleared them for takeoff, and she pushed the throttles forward. The jet surged down the runway, wheels lifting off the ground with a smooth grace that belied the sheer weight of the machine. Within minutes, they climbed through layers of atmosphere, piercing the morning clouds. Below them, the patchwork of Texas fields stretched endlessly. Above, the sky opened wide, a perfect shade of blue that only pilots truly knew. At 30,000 feet, the world looked peaceful, untouchable. In the cabin, the passengers settled into their routines. A businessman loosened his tie and ordered black coffee. A teenage girl pressed her forehead against the window, marveling at the clouds. The toddler finally drifted off to sleep in his mother's arms. For them, this was simply transportation, a pause between destinations. They couldn't imagine that their lives would soon rest in the hands of one woman's training, composure, and instinct. In the cockpit, and Jason exchanged small talk as the autopilot steadied the plane. "How long were you in the Navy, Captain?" Jason asked, curious. Glanced at him briefly before returning her eyes to the instruments. "Long enough to learn that every flight is a gift," she said simply. Her tone made it clear that was all she intended to share. Jason didn't press further. Yet as the plane cruised steadily toward Denver, his mind drifted, not to memories she wished to relive, but to the faint intuition every pilot learns to respect. A whisper in her gut told her that something, at some point, was going to test her today. For now the sky was calm, the passengers unaware, and the engines hummed their steady tune. It was an ordinary flight. But for Captain Ward, ordinary never lasted long. The cabin lights dimmed to a comfortable glow as Flight 237 cut smoothly through the upper atmosphere. Passengers unbuckled their belts, stretching into the comfort of cruising altitude. A flight attendant rolled a cart down the aisle, offering sodas, coffee, and tiny packets of pretzels. From the outside, the plane was just a silver speck against a vast blue sky. From the inside, it felt like a traveling sanctuary. In the cockpit, Captain Ward leaned back slightly, her eyes scanning the horizon. The hum of the engines was steady, rhythmic, the kind of sound that made experienced pilots relax. Her co-pilot, Jason Miller, was thumbing through flight logs when a subtle flicker on the control panel caught his attention. "Captain, did you see that?" Jason asked, frowning. Turned her gaze to the panel. A light had blinked for less than a second, so quick that it could have been dismissed as a glitch, but didn't dismiss things. Not ever. Her instincts sharpened and she adjusted her seat forward, studying the gauges. Then it happened. A low warning alarm pulsed through the cockpit, followed by the heavy shudder of the airframe. The right engine sputtered violently, coughed once, then went silent. The sudden loss of thrust jerked the plane slightly to the side. Coffee spilled from Jason's cup, and the autopilot disengaged with a harsh tone. "Engine 2 failure," said firmly, her voice controlled but urgent. Her hands moved quickly, steadying the yoke. Jason's breath caught. "But how? We just had full clearance." "Doesn't matter. Run the checklist," she ordered. Her voice had changed, no longer casual, no longer gentle. It was sharp, commanding, the tone of a pilot who had faced danger before. Jason scrambled to the emergency binder, flipping through laminated pages as the cockpit alarms grew louder. In the cabin, the first hints of unease rippled through the passengers. The turbulence grew rougher, drinks spilled, and the toddler began to cry. A nervous businessman pressed his call button. Flight attendants exchanged worried glances, whispering instructions while forcing practiced smiles. "Ladies and," his voice finally came over the intercom, calm and even, "we're experiencing a technical issue. Please remain seated with your fastened. Our crew is trained for situations like this, and will keep you informed." Her delivery was perfect, smooth, reassuring. But inside the cockpit, things were unraveling. The engine wasn't coming back. And worse, the electrical systems began flickering, cutting in and out like a bad connection. Screens that had been brightly lit now glitched with static before returning. Felt the plane resisting her inputs, sluggish and unpredictable. Jason's voice shook. "Communications are dropping, Captain. ATC's barely coming through." Flicked the radio switch, listening. "Denver Center, this is Flight 237. We've lost an engine and are experiencing electrical issues, requesting immediate vectors for priority landing." Static hissed in reply. A garbled voice broke through, then vanished again. The connection was unstable, unreliable. Jason glanced sideways at her, panic rising in his eyes. "If we lose both engines." "We won't," she cut in. "Not on my watch." Her tone silenced him, but the truth was undeniable. They were losing altitude faster than they should. The plane trembled as turbulence clawed at its weakened systems, fought the yoke with steady, deliberate movements. Every instinct screamed at her to act with precision, not panic. She had been in situations worse than this, under fire, engines failing, flying through storms of flak in a jet meant for war. This wasn't combat, but the principle was the same. If she cracked, people died. The cabin grew tense as masks rattled in their compartments, ready to drop. A flight attendant braced herself against clutching the intercom with white knuckles. Passengers whispered, their voices rising with each bump of turbulence. In the cockpit, Jason's breathing quickened. "Captain, should we declare Mayday?" His eyes narrowed, steady on the horizon. "We already did, now we fly the plane." She tapped controls with practiced speed, shutting down what she knew was beyond saving, rerouting power where she could. Each movement was deliberate, every second a battle to keep the machine alive long enough to reach a runway. Yet deep in her gut felt a shadow she hadn't expected. This wasn't a routine engine failure. Something else was wrong, something bigger. And somewhere far below, at NORAD command, radar operators were already noticing Flight 237's strange behavior. The cabin of Flight 237 was beginning to shift from nervous chatter to restrained panic. Passengers clutched armrests as the aircraft jolted violently through the air. Overhead bins rattled, coffee spilled, and whispers of "what's going on" grew louder. Though the flight attendants moved with trained composure, their voices carried an edge they couldn't completely hide. In the cockpit, fought to steady the crippled aircraft, every muscle in her arms strained as she kept the jet's nose level. "Hold her steady," she muttered under her breath, coaxing the plane as though it were a living thing. Jason, beside her, was pale, his hands trembling over the controls. On the ground, hundreds of miles away, NORAD radar screens lit up with an anomaly. Flight 237 had gone off course, its transponder flickering irregularly. Communications were broken, erratic. To the military, there was no way of knowing whether the plane was in distress or in hostile hands. In a post-9/11 world, such uncertainty triggered one protocol: scramble the fighters. Within minutes, 2 F-18 Hornets thundered into the sky from an airbase, climbing with predatory speed toward the blip on the radar. Their mission was simple but heavy: identify, escort, and if necessary, neutralize. Back in the cabin, passengers pressed their faces against the windows as shadows appeared against the sunlight. Gasps spread like wildfire. "Oh my God, are those fighter jets?" someone shouted. A teenage boy clutched his phone, recording shaky footage of the gray war machines sliding into formation beside the plane. The mother with the toddler pulled her child close, whispering frantic prayers. Fear swept through the cabin. People weren't just worried about a malfunction anymore. They were now imagining hijackers, terrorists, or worse. A businessman muttered, "They don't send those unless they think we're a threat." Flight attendants moved quickly to keep control, repeating calm instructions. "Please remain seated. The captain has everything under control." But the sight of military jets out the window said otherwise. In the cockpit, finally caught a glimpse of the Hornet sliding into position on her wings. Her jaw tightened. She knew exactly what it meant. She had once been in their place, ordered to shadow planes that might not be what they appeared. And she knew the unspoken truth: if NORAD believed Flight 237 was compromised, those F-18s wouldn't hesitate to take action. Jason's voice cracked. "Captain, what do we do? They're armed, they think we're hostile." Didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon, her mind racing. She could feel the fighter pilots watching her every move, analyzing the plane's path, waiting for orders from the ground. She wasn't just flying a crippled jet anymore. She was under silent judgment from warriors with missiles at their disposal. "Stay calm," she finally said. "Their job is to protect lives. Ours is to get this plane safely down." Jason swallowed hard, glancing again at the F-18 slicing through the sky beside them. "And if they don't believe us?" Didn't reply. She knew the answer too well. The turbulence worsened, rattling the cabin again. Masks dropped suddenly from overhead compartments, dangling like grim reminders of what was at stake. Passengers screamed as the jet dipped before wrestled it level again. Outside, the Hornets tightened formation, close enough now that she could see the pilots through their canopies. And then came the silence, the eerie, absolute silence. Fighter pilots were under strict orders not to break radio silence unless commanded. They wouldn't speak. They wouldn't reveal anything. They would simply watch, waiting for either trust or the signal to act. His heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady on the yoke. She had lived this life before. She knew those men and women in the Hornets were trained to see enemies, not friends. If she wanted to keep 200 innocent passengers alive, she would need to remind those fighter pilots of exactly who she was. The cabin behind her was filled with fear. The co-pilot beside her was unraveling, and outside the silent Hornets watched, weapons armed. The moment was coming when silence would have to break. The Hornets held their formation with precision, sleek predators shadowing the wounded airliner. From inside Flight 237, the sight was surreal, military jets flying so close that passengers could see the insignia on their wings. Phones filmed the spectacle, whispers turned to sobs, and the sense of dread deepened. This wasn't turbulence anymore. This was survival measured by seconds. In the cockpit, Jason's hands trembled as he adjusted dials that refused to respond. "They think we're hostile, Captain. If we lose comms completely, if we veer even a little," his voice cracked, "they'll take us down." Didn't look at him. Her focus was absolute, eyes sharp as steel on the horizon. "We're not hostile, we're in distress. They'll see it." But Jason wasn't convinced. He had studied military protocols in flight school, the post-9/11 procedures that left no room for hesitation. To NORAD, a plane off course with broken communications wasn't just an emergency, it was a potential weapon. A shudder ran through the aircraft, another surge of turbulence rattling passengers and cockpit alike, gritted her teeth and steadied the yoke. Her instincts screamed that she was running out of time. The Hornets tightened their approach, wings slicing the air with cold discipline. Their pilots couldn't hear the panicked voices in the cabin, couldn't see the mother clutching her child or the businessman muttering prayers under his breath. All they saw was an unresponsive blip on their screens, a potential threat heading toward populated airspace. Exhaled slowly. She had been on their side before, helmeted, strapped into a fighter jet, waiting for orders that could change lives in seconds. She knew what they were thinking. She knew the silence wasn't indifference, it was discipline. And she knew discipline could only bend for something stronger: recognition. Her hand hovered over the radio. Regulations said she should stick to standard civilian protocols, keep the language neutral and professional. But standard wasn't working. Static still cut through every call to ATC, and the Hornets weren't responding. Jason noticed her hesitation. "Captain, what are you doing?" Her voice dropped low, steady, deliberate. "There's only one way to make them listen." Jason blinked. "What do you mean?" His eyes flickered for the first time away from the horizon, meeting his. They were calm, but beneath that calm was a weight, the weight of someone who had carried responsibility far greater than this cockpit. "I'm going to remind them who I am." She switched frequencies, her fingers moving with practiced ease over the radio panel. The cockpit filled with a tense hum of static. Then, with a clarity that seemed to slice through the chaos, she spoke a single word into the void. "Valkyrie." Jason froze, staring at her. What did you just say?" The name hung in the air like thunder. To Jason, it meant nothing, but to others it carried history. In the Hornets, helmets turned. Inside their cockpits, the word crackled through headsets like a ghost from the past. One pilot nearly forgot to breathe. The call sign wasn't just familiar, it was legendary. Valkyrie had been one of the Navy's most respected aviators, a pilot whose daring maneuvers and unshakable composure in combat had become stories told to inspire younger generations. And now that voice, unmistakable, calm, resolute, was speaking from the crippled commercial jet before them. For a few precious seconds, silence continued. Then, breaking orders, one of the F-18 pilots leaned into his mic. "Valkyrie, is that really you?" The words sliced through the static, forbidden but unstoppable. Jason's mouth fell open. The Hornets had broken radio silence for her. His voice remained cool. "This is Flight 237. We've lost an engine, suffering electrical failures. 200 souls aboard, requesting immediate clear corridor and priority landing." No panic, no pleading, just command. The tone of someone who didn't ask for favors, she gave orders. Inside the F-18s, hearts raced. Against every standing regulation, respect overrode discipline. The silence was broken. They would follow Valkyrie. Back in the cabin, passengers remained oblivious to the weight of the moment, still staring nervously at the warplanes outside their windows. They didn't know that the fate of their flight had just shifted, not because of systems or protocols, but because of a name. A call sign. Valkyrie. The radio crackled again, clearer this time, as if the very air had shifted to make room for something forbidden. Valkyrie, confirm it's you, came the steady voice of one of the Hornet pilots. Even through layers of static, all clung to the words. Jason gaped at the radio as though it had just spoken in tongues. They know you. Didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the instruments, her hands steady on the yoke. I trained half their squadron, she said simply, her tone flat, unflinching. Another voice joined in, the wingman, younger, his voice tight with disbelief. Ma'am, orders are to maintain radio silence, but if that's you, what do you need? Jason's breath caught. Fighter pilots breaking comms meant more than just respect. It meant they were ready to defy orders. That kind of loyalty wasn't given. It was earned. Press the transmit switch, her tone composed. This is Captain Ward, call sign Valkyrie. Flight 237, Denver route. We've lost an engine, partial electrical failure, 200 civilians aboard. I need a clear approach corridor and ground coordination. Copy. The response was immediate, sharp, and absolute. Copy that, Valkyrie, we're with you. Jason whispered under his breath, they're following you. Ignored him, her focus unwavering. For the first time since the crisis began, she had allies who understood. They weren't just fighter escorts anymore, they were her wingmen. Down in the cabin, passengers peered through the windows, watching as the Hornets adjusted formation. Instead of menacing shadows, they now looked like guardians, bracketing the plane with deliberate precision. The shift was subtle but powerful, even those who didn't know why could feel it. The jets weren't there to end the flight. They were there to protect it. In the cockpit, Jason tried to keep up. Captain, ATC is still patchy. We're barely getting through. If the Hornets are talking to us, does that mean? It means, cut him off, that we just got priority airspace. The Hornet leader's voice came again, this time with crisp clarity. Valkyrie, NORAD is tracking. I'll handle comms with ground. You just keep that bird in the air. Corridor to Denver is being cleared. Jason shook his head in disbelief. They're overriding protocol for you. They're breaking orders. Do you know what that means? His lips pressed into a thin line. It means we have one chance, and we're taking it. As the minutes ticked by, the coordination became seamless. The Hornets flew tight, adjusting to every tremor of the wounded jet, carving a protective path through the crowded skis. Other aircraft were rerouted, entire corridors of airspace cleared with the silent authority of military intervention. In the cabin, rumors flew faster than the jet itself. Some passengers believed the fighters were there to shoot them down. Others insisted it was an escort to safety. A child pressed her hand against the window, smiling at the sleek gray machine flying beside them. Her mother pulled her away, fear in her eyes. But in the cockpit, his composure never wavered. The Hornets trusted her. They didn't see a crippled civilian plane anymore. They saw Valkyrie at the controls, and that was enough. Jason glanced at her again, unable to contain his curiosity. Captain, what did you do in the Navy? His hands adjusted the yoke as she kept the plane steady through another shudder. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Enough, she said softly, to know they'll follow me to the ground. The Hornet leader's voice came once more, calm and sure. Valkyrie, you've got clear skis to Denver. ATC will vector emergency services. We're with you all the way. And with that, the tension inside the cockpit shifted. For the first time since the alarms began, Jason felt the faintest glimmer of hope. They weren't alone anymore. Yet knew the hardest part was still to come. Getting the plane to the runway would take more than escorts and comms. It would take precision, daring, and control at the edge of impossibility. The silence had been broken, but survival was still far from guaranteed. The Denver skyline shimmered faintly on the horizon, still miles away but growing closer with every turbulent second. For the passengers of Flight 237, it felt like salvation dangling just out of reach. But for Captain Ward, it wasn't the sight of the city that held her focus. It was the jagged line of the runway that she needed to reach with a plane that was barely holding together. The right engine was gone. The left strained under the weight, sputtering dangerously with each dip of the nose. Electrical power flickered in bursts, leaving vital instruments unreliable. Every time the lights on her panel went dark for a fraction of a second, his mind calculated the terrifying possibility. What if they didn't come back on? Jason clutched the yoke beside her, his voice cracking. "Captain, we can't make this descent, not at this speed, if we keep dropping." "We'll overshoot," finished calmly, her eyes narrowing. "I know." Her brain was already spinning through possibilities, cross-checking options the way only years of combat experience could teach. Standard procedures wouldn't work here. The manuals Jason clung to couldn't prepare him for this kind of chaos. No, this demanded instinct. This demanded Valkyrie. Outside, the Hornets stayed locked in formation, their sleek frames cutting through the sky like arrows. The lead pilot's voice came through the headset. "Valkyrie, you're coming in too hot. You need to slow her down." Almost smiled. "That's the idea." Jason's eyes widened. "Wait, what are you?" "Trust me," she said firmly, cutting him off. The jet shuddered violently as disengaged autopilot completely. From here on, it would be her hands alone keeping 200 lives balanced between survival and disaster. The co-pilot's grip tightened, but his hands were steady, almost relaxed. "All right, girl," she muttered under her breath to the plane itself. "Don't quit on me now." The descent began sharper than regulations allowed. Passengers screamed as the nose dipped, oxygen masks swaying wildly in the cabin. The mother clutched her toddler against her chest, murmuring prayers. A businessman grabbed the hand of a stranger beside him. Others cried openly, convinced this was the end. But didn't hear them. All she heard was the roar of the wind, the straining of the engines, and the pounding rhythm of her own heartbeat. Her mind slipped seamlessly into the fighter-pilot mode she thought she'd left behind. The civilian jet wasn't designed for combat maneuvers, but she treated it like one anyway. Banking hard, she lined up with the runway far earlier than protocol dictated, bleeding altitude with controlled aggression. Jason shouted, "We're too steep." But she ignored him, eyes fixed on the black strip of tarmac ahead. "Valkyrie," the Hornet pilot called over comms, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're not actually." "Yes, I am," she cut in. The radio went silent. The final moments stretched like hours. The runway loomed closer, but so did the ground on either side. Every vibration of the yoke threatened catastrophe. Jason's voice cracked into near panic. "We're going in too fast." "Fast is better than short," replied, her voice as steady as if she were discussing weather conditions. With a final burst of control, she flared the nose just above the tarmac. Tires screamed against asphalt, smoke billowed from the violent contact, and the entire fuselage shuddered under the force. The plane bucked hard, trying to tear free of her grip, but wrestled it with the strength of someone who refused to let go. Sparks flew. The left engine coughed one last time and died completely. The jet skidded, fishtailed, then straightened under her command. In the cabin, passengers screamed, prayed, sobbed. And then, silence fell as the plane stayed upright, slowing inch by inch until the nightmare screech softened into a grinding roll. His hands finally loosened, sweat dripping down her temple. Her voice came low, steady, controlled. "We're down." Jason exhaled in disbelief, slumping in his seat. That wasn't in any manual. His eyes flicked once to him, a faint glimmer in her calm expression. "That's because manuals don't win wars." Outside, the Hornets peeled upward into the clouds, their mission complete. They had watched Valkyrie pull off the impossible again. The roar of the engines faded into a hollow quiet as the crippled jet rolled to a final stop at the edge of the runway. Smoke trailed from its wheels, the acrid scent of scorched rubber filling the cabin. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Passengers sat frozen, as if afraid that any sound might undo the miracle that had just occurred. Then, like a dam breaking, the silence erupted into cries of relief, of gratitude, of disbelief. Some wept openly, clutching their neighbors. Others cheered, voices raw with adrenaline and survival. The child who had pressed her hand to the window earlier squealed with laughter, too young to understand how close they had all come to the edge. In the cockpit, exhaled slowly and reached for the brake controls, her motions still steady despite the sweat soaking her collar. She checked the readings, confirming what her instincts already knew. The plane had given her everything it had left. It wouldn't have gone another mile. Beside her, Jason sagged in his seat, his chest heaving. His trembling hands hovered uselessly above the panel before he finally let them fall. He turned to with wide eyes, voice hoarse. That shouldn't have been possible. Kept her gaze forward, scanning the runway where emergency vehicles now raced toward them, lights flashing like beacons in the night. Possible or not, she said evenly, we're here. Jason swallowed hard, staring at her with a mixture of fear and awe. You didn't just land a broken plane. You fought it down, like you were flying combat again. His jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Her silence spoke more than words ever could. Above, the F-18s broke formation. One by one, they climbed sharply, their engines screaming as they disappeared into the night sky. Not a single transmission came through the radio. No acknowledgement, no farewell. Just the disciplined silence of soldiers who had seen enough to know legends when they were standing before them. Jason noticed their departure, blinking rapidly. They didn't even wait for orders, they just left. They were never here, said quietly, almost to herself. In the cabin, the flight attendants rushed to restore order. The passengers, still shaken, began gathering their belongings as instructed, though many moved with trembling hands. Phones lit up as people tried to capture proof of the hornets outside, though all they caught were fatting contrails above the clouds. Control tower chatter spilled through the radio again, now loud and frantic. Flight 237 confirmed status. Repeat, confirmed status. Reached for the transmitter, her voice cool, controlled. Flight 237, emergency landing complete, aircraft secure, no fatalities, medical assistance requested. The tower went silent for half a breath before answering, voice cracking with relief. Copy, Flight 237. Emergency crews are on their way. Welcome back. Jason let out a shaky laugh, leaning back in his chair. Welcome back, he repeated, as though the phrase itself was absurd after what they'd survived. But his expression didn't soften. Her eyes lingered on the horizon where the hornets had vanished. The passengers, the crew, the tower, none of them knew the truth. None of them understood that the miracle wasn't just the landing. It was that a pair of combat pilots had broken ironclad silence, risking careers and orders to follow her. The legend of Valkyrie had returned, if only for a few fleeting minutes. As the emergency truck surrounded the plane, Jason turned toward her once more, voice lowered, uncertain. Captain, who exactly are you? Finally looked at him, her eyes sharp, unflinching. Someone who doesn't belong in the history books, she said quietly, and I intend to keep it that way. Jason stared at her, stunned. But before he could press further, the cockpit door opened and medics stormed in, pulling them back into the present. For everyone else, this was the end of a harrowing ordeal. For it was only the reopening of a door she had fought for years to keep closed. And though the passengers cheered her as a hero, she knew better. Heroes told their stories. Valkyrie had always lived in silence. The night air at Denver International was thick with floodlights and flashing sirens. Emergency vehicles encircled the crippled jet, spraying foam onto the scorched wheels as paramedics rushed aboard. Passengers, still dazed, stumbled down evacuation slides into the arms of first responders. Some wept with relief, Others clutched their phones, already dialing loved ones to say words they hadn't expected to live to speak. Reporters swarmed the terminal, tipped off by scanners and whispers. Their cameras flashed like lightning as the survivors shuffled through. The headline was already writing itself: "Airliner saved in miracle landing." But none of them knew the whole story. None of them had seen the Hornets break silence. None of them had heard the forbidden call sign echo through the static. Moved quietly through the chaos, her uniform damp with sweat but her posture still precise. Medics tried to push her toward a stretcher, insisting on evaluation, but she waved them off. Her calm authority silenced even the most insistent nurse. Jason trailed behind her, his mind still replaying every impossible moment. "Captain, you can't just walk away. Do you know what you did tonight? People are going to talk about this for years." Didn't slow her stride, then let them talk. "But the Hornets," he pressed. "They broke comms for you. Why? Who are you?" She stopped then, just for a moment, turning to face him under the glare of the floodlights. Her eyes, sharp as ever, held his without flinching. "I was Valkyrie," she said softly. "Once. A long time ago. That's all you need to know." Jason's breath caught. It wasn't just the words. It was the weight behind them. She wasn't boasting, she wasn't explaining, she was closing the door. Before he could speak again, security arrived to escort her toward debriefing with FAA officials. Jason watched as she walked away, her figure swallowed by the crowd. He had flown beside her, but he realized he barely knew her at all. Inside the terminal, passengers gave statements to investigators, some insisting the fighters had saved them, others certain it was a loan. Conflicting stories spread quickly, and by morning, online forums were ablaze with speculation. A grainy cell phone video captured two faint silhouettes of F-18s peeling upward into the night sky. Conspiracy theories blossomed. Was the government covering up an attempted? Had NORAD scrambled escorts without authorization? Yet in military circles, the whispers carried a different tune. Pilots who hadn't flown that night still spoke of it in hushed tones. The moment silence broke and a ghost returned. Valkyrie. No official records mentioned her name. No transcript included her call sign. The Hornet pilots who had spoken it never filed a word in their reports. But legends didn't need paper to survive. They lived in stories passed between aviators in dim-lit bars, in the unspoken reverence of those who knew what it meant for hardened warriors to break protocol. Jason gave testimony the next day, recounting calm, her impossible maneuver, her refusal to panic. But when pressed about her past, about why the Hornets obeyed her, he simply shook his head. Some truths, he decided, weren't his to tell. Weeks later, when the headlines faded and Flight 237 became just another footnote in aviation safety studies, Jason still thought about her. He'd hear the word Valkyrie whispered in online threads, in pilots' lounges in the back corners of airfields. Always in awe, always with respect. As for she disappeared back into the quiet rhythm of her life. No interviews, no books, no speeches. She returned to the skis, flying routes like any other captain, blending into the anonymity of commercial aviation. But every time she sat in the cockpit and the engines roared to life, she could feel it lingering. The moment silence had broken, and the sky had remembered her name. Valkyrie. And though the world would never truly know what happened that night, those who had been there carried the truth in their bones. The passengers, the Hornet pilots, Jason. For them, it wasn't just a story. It was survival. For Ward, it was something else entirely. It was proof that no matter how far you ran, some call signs never died.